Hello and welcome back to another Living Lambo 3D printing video. Today we're going to be making Paz Vizsla's, otherwise known as Heavy Mando's helmet from the Mandalorian. The helmet was printed in 3 parts on my Creality CR10 as well as an additional 8 detail pieces. The file was created by mystery makers who will be linked in the description. So let's get started. Before we can assemble the helmet, I wanted to get some of the initial sanding done. The 3 pieces are just easier to handle than the entire helmet would have been. One of the good things about this helmet is that it doesn't have a lot of detail, so it's pretty easy just to hit it with the palm sander and 60 grit sandpaper. There were still some areas that needed to be hand sanded, mostly the face mask, cheeks, but the entire helmet gets a passing of 60 grit, 120 grit, and 220 grit. I wanted to give the bottom of the helmet an ample amount of time to dry after gluing it together, so I thought gluing it together prior to doing any work on the dome was a good idea. I like to use both Gorilla Glue and E6000. The Gorilla Glue will dry quickly and is usually enough to hold in most cases, but with something like this helmet that's going to see a lot of usage, the E6000 is just going to give it a little bit extra strength so it doesn't fall apart. The E6000 does take about 24 hours to fully cure though, so this clamp is going to be used to hold everything together while we wait. The helmet was made with these little grooves on the inside, so that's what we're going to be gluing together. And the entire gluing process is repeated for the other side. And then the entire sanding and gluing process was followed for the dome, and we ended up with this. Now, even with all the sanding we just did, there's still going to be spots that need a little bit of help. And for those areas, I like to use Bondo spot putty. Those spots will usually be in non-flat areas, like the dome of a helmet, so use that Bondo to really get into the grooves left by the 3D printer. Give the Bondo like 2 hours to dry and then hit it with a mid-range sandpaper, 180, 220, somewhere around there. So after everything's smooth, we give it a nice coat of primer. I usually like to do 2 light coats followed by 2 heavy coats. And then you may have guessed it, More sanding. Somehow, after all that, there are still some layer lines left. So we're going to go to the Bondo one more time and provide the last push before we can finally start painting this thing. I set it up on this bucket like this just to help me get the undersides of it a little bit better than I could if it was flipped the other way. And in what I promise is the last round of sanding, everything's gonna get hit with a 400 grit wet sand. Even the ears, which I don't think y'all have seen yet. Paz's helmet is very weathered and has a ton of paint chips all over it. So to try and replicate that, we're going to start with a silver base coat. I'm trying a technique I've never really tried before where I'm strategic about where I'm putting the silver. And I'm hoping down the line that it gives the helmet an even more weathered and defined look to it. But all the earpieces and the bag vent are going to get the complete treatment. Now I'm going to be using liquid latex to mask off all the parts of the silver that I want to be able to see later. I have quite a few different brushes that I used here, just so you would have different shapes and textures and that kind of thing. I even have toothpicks there in the bottom right hand corner that you can see. So next we're going to apply this dark metal color, and we're going to follow the same process that we did earlier, because this too will get liquid latex on top of it. We're only going to spray it in areas we want it to show through. For the bottom part and the top part of the ears, I'm following the same process I am for the helmet. You saw it get that silver base coat earlier. I masked it off, and now those parts are getting this dark metal color. Once everything was nice and dry, I started going in and removing the masking over the silver base that I had left earlier. This was the first time I'd ever used liquid masking. Normally I use like mustard or toothpaste. So I wasn't quite sure the best way to remove the masking, but I ended up figuring out that just using your finger was far and away the easiest. So prior to spraying the blue, I went back and I remasked everything because I didn't want it just showing silver. I wanted some of that dark metal around the edges. Gonna give kind of a little bit of a sneak peek here and show you what I'm talking about. This was the final product, and you can just kind of see the dark metal kind of peeking out over the silver. That was a light coat. I'm doing finger quotations if you could see me. Now I'm going to go back over it with a little bit of a heavier coat, and this should be the final coat of this main blue that we're going to do. To attach the ears, we're going to do what we did earlier with actually attaching the entire helmet. We're just going to be using a little bit of CA glue and push the ear into place, hold it for a minute or two, and you're good to go. And finally, we're going to mask everything so we can spray the lighter blue on the cheeks. Okay, so now it's time for the finishing details. Usually this would be when I make the helmet very grimy and muddy, but I didn't want that here. I didn't want that to overpower all the work we've already done. So I mixed a small amount of black acrylic paint with an even smaller amount of brown paint, and then mixed that with some water, and I applied it to the edges of the helmet or areas I thought would collect grime and dirt. Let it sit for a few minutes and then wiped it away. Because I watered down the paint so much, I have to do this a lot. But I feel like it's worth it for the end result. And the final thing to do is to use a pink piece of my daughter's construction paper to cut out the visor. I've really started to love using these top loaders for visors because the plastic is so thin that it's incredibly easy to deal with. You just, form it into whatever shape you want to. This is the first time I've ever tinted anything, so I'm not going to sit here and pretend I can give you a bunch of tips and tricks, but obviously there's a ton of videos on YouTube to figure this sort of thing out. And because this was the first time I ever tinted anything, I elected just to tape it inside the helmet so I can go back at a later date and maybe do a little bit better job.